Google has just recently made an update to their Google Forms. Specifically, they've changed the settings, where it's located, and some of the settings that you can use to manage your Google form. So let me get out of the way, and we'll take a look at that together. Here is a screenshot taken of a blank Google form just a couple of weeks ago. This is how it's looked for the last couple of years at least. Up here in the upper right corner, you can see there was the gear icon that would bring you to your settings panel. Now, let's take a look at a current Google form. Here we are looking at a Google form that I just started, and up here in the upper right corner, you will see there is no longer a gear icon for the settings. Instead, it's been replaced by an undo and a redo arrow, which are nice features. The settings have been moved right here top and center. Along with our questions and responses that we've always had, we have a third tab that takes us to our settings controls. So let's take a look at those. When I click on the settings control, there are two sections. The settings at the top, which are controlling settings for this exact form, and then the default settings down below, which would control things for this form and for all future forms unless I go back and change the default settings again. Let's walk through these quickly just so you know what we have here. The top one says to take the form that I've just created and make it a quiz. Whatever sorts of questions I've asked, now we're going to do it in a test format. If I choose that, I get a number of new options. When to release the grades back to the student? Do I want to lock their Chromebook so that they can't leave the form and Google the answers while they're taking the test? How do I want the form to handle missed questions, correct answers, point values, etc.? I'm not going to review all of these right now because we rarely use this test setting in the work that we're doing here. And if you did need to go through these, they're pretty self-explanatory. So I'm just going to turn this off and let you go there if you need to, but we're going to move on to things we use more often. Responses is something that we will use a lot. First of all, deciding whether or not we want to collect an email address when someone fills out our form. I typically do not turn that on. For some reason, that seems to kind of intimidate some people a little bit. But I will usually ask for their first and last name, so at least I know who is participating. But you can turn it on if you want. You will have to turn it on if you activate this second part. Send responders a copy of their response. You can't do that unless you're collecting their email address. If you turn that on, you'll see this becomes an option. And now, if someone filled out a form and at the end they could say, yeah, I'd like to have a copy of my questions, Google would email that to them, or you could just automatically do that. I don't usually do surveys where that's a particularly important feature, so I keep that off. Allow response editing. After someone has submitted the form, if they have the link to the form, can they go back and get their submitted answers and change them? I usually keep that turned off. That just complicates things, and I don't really need that. The questions that I'm asking, the first response is fine. Are we restricting it to people who work in our organization? Meaning they would have to be logged in to their work Google account in order to complete the form. Sometimes that's on, sometimes it's off. The default will always be on, and I will leave it on if I'm collecting information that I really want to have kind of feel more protected about, and I want to make sure that the link doesn't go beyond our employees. But mostly the information that I'm collecting when I set up a form is not that private, and I want people to be able to fill it out at their convenience, maybe on their phone or an iPad where they may not be logged into their work account. So in those cases, I could turn that off, and then they could respond from anywhere. And lastly, am I going to limit them to one response? If I turn that on, they will have to be signed into Google again because that's how Google tracks that they've already made a response. If I leave it off, they will get an option to respond more than once. Presentation. How is this going to be presented to them? If it's a really long form with multiple questions or more than one section, you might want to turn on a progress bar just so they can see they're 30% through, they're 75% through. I tend to do pretty short surveys, so I keep that off. Do I need to shuffle the question order? No, not really. That would be more if I were doing it as a test, but it's not like anybody's cheating on the forms that I'm sending out. What happens after they submit the form? They get a confirmation message. And right now, they will always get a response that says, your response has been recorded. I almost always edit that and give them a thanks, and then I let them know what has happened. I might still say, your answer has been saved. I might give them a little more information. If they've set up an appointment with me, I might say, thanks. I look forward to meeting you at our scheduled time. I might even say where we're going to meet. I look forward to meeting you in my office, room 235. You can even put a web link in here. You can put a URL. Thanks for filling out this form. If you would like more information, click here. And they can go see a video or go to a website that has information related to what your questions were about. So I do change that up almost every time and save a particular thing. Do I want to make it easy for them to fill out the form more than once? I usually turn that off because I just want their first answer. Do I want them to be able to view the results? No, they don't need to see the results. Do I want to disable autosave? That is a new feature for Google for Forms, that if you've started a form and then your browser refreshes, or you have to step away to take a phone call and your account logs out and you have to log back in, do you want Google to autosave your responses so you can pick up where you left off, or do you want people to have to start over with the form? Auto-saving is the default, but you can turn that off if you're worried that people are walking away because they're going somewhere else to get answers to test questions or whatever. But for most purposes, I don't need that on. The final two things, the more global settings, do I want to always collect email addresses by default? If I turn that on, it's just going to collect them all the time, no matter what my other settings are. And the question defaults, do I want to make all of the questions required questions? I almost always make my questions required because I'm not usually asking questions that I don't want people to answer. But sometimes one answer will depend on what another answer has been, and they may not need to answer. If I've got this turned on, it forces them to answer every question. I prefer to set that up question by question as I set up my form. So there, your new settings panel, found right here at the top center with the tabs for questions and responses, and what each setting allows you to do to control your form.